Welcome to Education Policy and Advocacy. In this session, we're going to take a brief trip down memory lane and really understand what education policy is and how we can be better advocates every day. So let's jump right in. I have lived many different careers in the music industry, being a music educator, working in music technology. I have a degree in education administration. I was working in the State Department of Louisiana on assessment and standards on Race to the Top and student growth measures. I was heavily involved in all of that. I led the Creative Arts Committee on writing all of those model assessments. I've been involved in the music industry, and I've been a passionate advocate for music for a long time. So this presentation is about a culmination of all of those experiences, but being able to really try to create a better understanding of what education policy is and what it is not, and how we can advocate. So let's go on. History of Education Law, Part 1. Now, there's some acronyms because education would not be complete without acronyms. So there's ESEA and NCLB and Race to the Top, and Common Core, and waivers and all of these things, and ESSA. So of course, we have to have a quiz, and it's okay if the baseline, if you get it wrong, right? Because we want to show growth. Okay. So let's understand what all these pieces are more appropriately. So let's go way back to the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. This goes all the way back to 1965. Lyndon Johnson, the Great War on Poverty. This was an act that took federal money to be able to make it accessible to states for the purpose of closing the equity gap and allowing students in poverty to have equal opportunities as other students. So this was supplemental federal funds that were distributed via a formula based on, for lack of a better term, how many poor students were in a school. The formula for those funds has changed throughout the years, but the concept of the federal government having money that's available as supplemental funds that states can choose or not to choose to take is the concept of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. That's what it does. Remember that education is a state right. The federal government does not control education, but it does have a whole bunch of money. And in this ESEA, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act originally signed, there's monies available for Title I, Title II, Title III, Title IV. We've heard these before. Now, this act has been changed over time, most notably and most memorably, No Child Left Behind. This was a revision of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act in 1965, but in this time, we put a huge new name on it. We made a big PR campaign about it, and one of the big changes around the formula for the money, right? The formula for the money is that we have to show growth and we need metrics. There was a lot of discussion at this time, almost 20 years ago, right, of how do we know our students are doing better? How do we compare a student's progress in Oklahoma to a student's progress in New York, to a student's progress in Louisiana and Maine and California and Oregon? What are the standards? And so we were looking for standards, and we were looking for ways to assess knowledge and show growth. No Child Left Behind also said, we're going to have these kind of really high percentages. And they set this magic year of 2014 that where all states are required to have so many percent of students meet so much percentage of progress, and we have to measure it. So what did we need to measure it? We need baseline testing, we need incremental testing, we need high stakes end of year testing. So test to test to test to test to test. Now, couple things happened over time, right? 2008, something happened, and it was a very, very bad something. It was the collapse of the housing bubble and the housing market and the sort of predatory lending practices that had been going on and the bundling of bad loans, and this whole financial situation just exploded, right? And it led us into a pretty hard economic times. Well, in 2008, something else was happening. We were changing administrations, right? We had a new president coming in. And this was inherited a massive financial crisis. So at the same time, No Child Left Behind was up for revision in 2007, 2008. But of course, with a Congress trying to massively help the country not fall into another depression, The revision of this law just didn't happen. So what did happen is the Department of Education, as part of the bailout money, right? There were several bailouts back in 2008, 2009, billions of dollars that were given as stimulus checks, similar to what we've seen recently with COVID. Part of that money was a little program that the Department of Education could run called Race to the Top. And it was $4 billion, I believe 4.65 if I'm not mistaken, $billion of stimulus money that the Department of Education could use for states. And of course, these were grant funds. And so this is different than education law. Congress sets education law. This was a whole bunch of money that the Department of Education could use. And so they set rules. So instead of backing off the testing requirements, we doubled down. And Race to the Top was essentially not a requirement, but it was the Department of Education saying, hi, states, I have a whole bunch of money. Would you like some for education? Great. All you have to do is do these things and stuff on this list. What were the things and stuff? Evaluate all teachers based on student growth. There was an idea that Race to the Top, No Child Left Behind had not shown the progress anyone expected. But then it was like, well, if the students aren't showing progress, how do we know the teachers are effective? So we're now going to affect teachers' pay and rate teachers based on the student growth of their students. And we're going to do this for all students, even non-tested grades and subjects. So we essentially doubled down. Race to the Top was a program that doubled down on testing, but it did it from a different angle, right? And so this was the beginning of many, many problems of education. Then, little known was this whole idea about ESEA Flex. Now, as we progress, we had this administration, 2008 to 2016. We had different parties in the White House and different parties in Congress. And if you lived through those times, you remember that it was a whole lot of arguing, a whole lot of fighting back and forth. And it was just very difficult to get anything done in Congress. So at this time, well, what's happening is No Child Left Behind, which is just essentially a revision of ESEA that we know now, had all of these kind of hard, fast rules in it. And then there was this magic year of 2014 where if students in certain states didn't show so much progress, funding was going to run out. Well, we did not revise the law. We're still operating under No Child Left Behind provisions. 2014's coming. We're still not there. So what did the department do? They said, you know what? Let's add flexibility. We will allow states to apply for waivers so that they are not held accountable to these strict measures set way back in 2002, and we haven't fixed the law yet, so we're just going to do waivers. Funny thing is, though, the marketing campaign, and I will argue propaganda, the marketing propaganda around the waivers, notice we use the term ESEA, not NCLB, right? So we sort of acted like, oh, well, NCLB is right. It's ESEA's problem, right? So we admit in this case that No Child Left Behind is a revision of ESEA, but in other cases we don't. So we changed it. And you see these funny graphics about transparency and reform. Funny thing is, I walked into the State Department one day with two binders, because I love me some binders, right? One binder was the Race to the Top provisions of states, the application for Race to the Top. The other binder was the application for ESEA waivers. And you know, they were pretty close, really close. And I looked and said, this is a conspiracy. The department's coming at it from both angles. They had made up their mind. We have to evaluate teachers based on student performance, and we need a common set of standards, and we're going to get it. In a lot of ways, this has been seen as an overreach by the Department of Education. And since then, the Department of Education has been limited in their power in this case because this wasn't education law. This was department. So now, funny thing is, we ended up with a situation, which I would say crisis. We had at this time 46 states, 45, I believe, 45 states operating on waivers from a broken law from 2002 with this whole Race to the Top program investing money into states and first round winners, second round winners, third round winners, and nothing's working. It's not working. We're literally providing waivers for a broken system, right? It's just kind of crazy in this way, right? So if you think it was a problem, it really, really was. Now, let's go forward. Common Core. Oh my gosh. Talk about the kid on the playground that didn't start the fight, but when the dust settled was standing there and it's the first one the teacher ran to punish. That was Common Core. Look, all these reforms being pushed, dangling the great money of Race to the Top. And over here, there was this other set of standards called Common Core State Standards Initiatives to align not the actual grade level expectations and knowledge of each state, but to align the way we ask questions. Common Core was an initiative being prepared by the National Government Association and the Association for College and Career Readiness. And it was the idea that our students are not prepared for successful careers because they're coming into the workforce and they're asking, I don't know what to do unless you give me instructions and I can fill in the bubbles on the test. We had created a generation of learners that were being taught to the test and only knew how to memorize something and do it. They couldn't create, they couldn't innovate, they couldn't think outside the bubbles, right? And Common Core was a reaction to say, we now see that our workforces are affected. Let's change this. Let's think about more word problems. Let's think about ways to ask questions, right? So then when Race to the Top came in and said, and waivers came in and said, we need to have national standards, a couple states latched onto Common Core and then everyone latched onto Common Core. And we said, wow, Common Core would be the standards. Just let me be clear. No law ever said Common Core is a mandate, right? And Race to the Top never said Common Core is a mandate, but it did mandate universal standards, and Common Core being developed, everyone latched on quickly, implemented, and then we even had companies come in and make what we call Common Core tests, PARC and Smarter Balance, right? And we've seen these tests come in, and then we changed the way we test students. Every state gets all this money from Race to the Top. Do you know what they do with the millions and millions of dollars that they won? They will go and buy the Smarter Balance and PARC assessments. I'm telling you, I lived through it. It was definitely advocating for something to make money. Private companies definitely profit off this, and it's been an issue. Now, so what did it leave us with, right? We tried to get out of this test thing, but yet my favorite education cartoon, right? We want differentiated instruction, but we want standardized testing. We have to measure everyone the same with the same thing. And Common Core got a real bad rap in the media. People hated some Common Core. Parents hated Common Core. Remember the whole Common Core math? A lot of craziness going on. Okay, so let's keep going with our history lesson. In December 10th of 2015, right before then President Obama was able to leave the administration, he was able to finally sign the new revision of ESEA, right? And this was the Every Student Succeeds Act. And what this did is drastically change the formula for the money again. Because again, all these revisions are still the original 1965 Elementary and Secondary Education Act, but we changed the formula for the money, right? That's what policy at the federal level does. It is a formula to get money that states can use based on rules. So the new act forgets all the idea of core subjects and talks about a well-rounded education. Students need to have a well-rounded education, and music is specifically included. This was one of the biggest wins for the music advocacy groups ever. And I will just, to the day I die, be so grateful that I got to be on Capitol Hill in meetings in 2014, 13, 15, in the offices, it was just so cool to be part of something that really ended up making a massive change. But this is a formula for funding, right? So the Title I explicitly referred to well-rounded. There's more professional development money. There's this whole idea of teacher evaluation is no longer required, right, by states. This is back in 2015. Now, the whole highly qualified was removed. There's different rules that were changed. But there was also this idea of this funding should supplement, not supplant, right? The idea of the original intent of this funding is to close the equity gap of students in poverty and to make sure every student gets a well-rounded education, not supplant school funding by being able to use it to hire aides and buy computers and stuff like that. It was not the idea of supplanting money and preventing states from now having to invest in state and education like they should. And that was one of the problems we have. States were winning this money and basically using it instead of their funding that they should be. This was supposed to be a supplement, not a supplant. But we really focused on that. Now, of course, here's where music was in well-rounded education. And I show this because, as you can see, while it was a win for education, there's a lot of things in the well-rounded section of this law, including any other subject as determined by the state or local education agency with the purpose of providing all students access to enriched curriculum and education experience. So yes, music's included, but then there's this little extra clause, and like basically anything else you can consider well-rounded, right? So it really, really opens it up. So we have to think about how we can use well-rounded, and these funds are available. But again, this is not to demean or devalue any of the great work done. But when we talk about education policy, this is about a formula for federal funding that can be used in certain ways. But how do we get it? How do we use it? Because the State Department can choose, is it a block grant? Is it a formula grant? All these different ways of coming out. And I won't get into the details of those, but the rules about how the money comes out does change slightly. But now let's think about this. Who actually drives education? I've said it before, the federal government is not the absolute top of education. They have this funding, this Education Act that provides supplemental funds. But if you look at, and this is an older chart, but if you just look at, overall education funding over time, look at local and state. Education is funded at the local and state level. Federal is a very, very small piece of that, right? So you also look at like what states got the most and least federal funding. So, at one point, this was way back in 2009, but this is right in the kind of height of all of this. The states that were getting the most share, that where the percentage of federal funding was the highest, were in the 15 to 16% range. The lowest is the 4%. So on average, you're still, about 10% of funding for education is coming from the federal government. But it's not the federal department that's driving everything, right? It's some of it, right? And you think about business. What does businesses impact? Do you have any initiatives and grants are available for businesses to focus on education? Businesses have a vested interest in supporting education because they need a stronger workforce, internships, the STEM initiative, STEM and STEAM, and getting more career readiness. That has an immediate effect on business, and business is involved. But at the end of the day, it's us as teachers in the classroom with our kids, right? It is those faces that drive education. And so while understanding the complications of policy and what the department does and what the law does and the formulas for money, all of that's great. But at the end of the day, it is up to us. And this is true music. All politics is local, right? All politics is local. And so it really comes down to what we do with our students and how we advocate, because while the federal funding's there, it doesn't mean they're going to come in and tell us what we have to teach. They're going to try to make rules around money, but we have to be the ones to educate up and pull in the funds for what's right for our students. Now, how did all of this affect advocacy? Because it did have an effect on advocacy. One thing that testing did is it forced us as advocates, and I was there and I've done it, is we had to make a case for funding based on test scores because all the funding got suddenly aligned to testing. So what did we do? Well, we made this strong case that music makes you smarter. That was our flag. No. Music does help academics. Music, you have to keep music because it will increase those test scores, which are directly tied to that Title I funding, directly tied to the school performance scores, right? Remember No Child Left Behind was the first concept of grading schools. We're going to grade schools, A, B, C, D, or F, all of this is tied in. And we did this as educators, and we did these things about why teach music, because it's math, it's science, it's language, it's all that. We made these ties, and you know what, at the time it probably is what we should have done, right? And we had all these different graphics, and if you look up any music advocacy graphics at the time, but here's the problem. In an effort to align music with what people were doing in testing, which by the way, testing was broken and not even showing great results in other subjects, we missed something. We missed the ability to talk about music for music's sake. Because when I look at this graphic and I think, what do these great minds have in common? They're all old dead white guys, right? And there's a danger in there, right? We shifted our advocacy in this huge effort of music for testing's sake, but I never taught music to improve a kid's math score. I taught music to change lives, and that's why you did it too. So if this is how you're used to advocacy, if this is what you're used to saying, remember, this type of advocacy is a reaction to a policy and education law debacle, which was, 2002 to 2015, right? It was a mess. It was a hot mess. And so this is reactive advocacy, and I want to move away from this. I want to move away. So what do we do now? Well, one of the things we have to do is realize that we are translators, right? So think about what we do as translators, as music educators. How do we affect education? Well, what does each stakeholder look at? Because the thing you got to learn is from being, and I've learned this from being an advocate at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level, and a teacher, is that every stakeholder is motivated by something different. Legislators are about policy and funding. When you walk into a legislator's office, you can share stories and you have brought students, and there's all beautiful materials you can bring them. At the end of the day, that meeting will end with, okay, what do you want? How much money does it take? What do you want me to vote for? What funding? It's always about how do I fund it, right? And so that's the ask at the legislative level. Do you think parents are worried about that? Parents want their kids to be happy and successful. Students want to have fun, fit in, enjoy accomplishment, right? Other educators, they're passionate about kids. Your administrators have their own pressures, like they wanted assessment data and school performance scores too. So think about how the message of why music matters changes. Because what we did is we took the legislative message and we used that for everyone. And that's not advocacy to me. Advocating for policy and funding is different than advocating for music education. And I have another session that you can watch on specifically advocating for music ed. This one's about the policy side. So here's what we do. We learn to make the pitch for music ed to each of these stakeholders. We are relentlessly positive. It is not, you didn't fund my law, that's not fair, I can't get this. We have to be positive. We have to have a clear ask. That's the other thing. If you get the opportunity to talk to your principal and we say, well, music makes you smarter, the Mozart effect proved this, and kids do better in math, I saw a study, and then music's just so wonderful and powerful. Well, that's great, but the principal's going to say, okay, what do you want me to do? Do you know what you want all these stakeholders to do? We have to have an ask. You cannot receive if you don't ask. So talking about why music's valuable is wonderful, but that is making a case to get something. What is that something, right? More kids in music, more kids staying in music. It could be funding. It could be better scheduling. It could be anything, right? But we are always advocating. We're always asking. The power of personal stories are the most strong that I've found. You don't have to know the law. You don't have to know that Title IV Part A funding can be used for this. I mean, yes, that's valuable, but don't feel like if you don't know those things, you can't be an advocate. Telling the story of why music changes lives, telling the story of how you've seen it happen to a student is super powerful in combination with an ask. We need to advocate for music's sake, not music for math's sake, right? So I've done some different asks. We go to the State Department, I go others, like you can go, and here's a couple definitions. Every child has access to a high quality music program. Great. Every school is a certified music educator whose sole duties are focused on music education. Those are two of the asks we used at the State Department a few years ago, but those are clear, right? What do you want? Here's what I want. Why do you want it? Well, here's a million reasons and stories of how music changes lives, right? But this is what we have to do. Have your ask ready. Also, it is not just up to you. Students, teach students how to share their enthusiasm. Have students write a 30-second pitch on why music's valuable and have them give them to their one other teacher, their parent, and an adult that's not another teacher or a parent. Have your students write it. They don't, if you don't teach them how to advocate, they're not going to be advocates, but they can. And think about this. What if you were doing a concert in between the transition between getting the different ensembles up, you had students go up to the microphone and read their 1-minute stories about why music is valuable to fill that time, right? There's so many opportunities where students can be our best advocates. Parents can be your best advocates. You have to get parents out there talking about why music is valuable. Every time you talk to a parent, are you sharing information that they can use and spread to others about why music's important, right? Can they be the ones that go to the school board? Does your school board hear music education on the regular? Can you have parents show up and read their stories? Do you share your enthusiasm with your school principal, with your administrators, with your other stakeholders in your school, right? Because that's what's really important. If the only time the principal hears from you is for a school bus request or for funding, they don't know why music's valuable. Do you share something your students accomplished? Do you share music with them, right? I want to go back to the parents thing, and I want to say that I think parents can be your best advocates. Think about the world in which we live now, right? We live in an online world, and I want to think about online shopping, which we all do a lot of. When you go online, whether it's Amazon or direct to other websites or whatever it is, whenever you're looking for restaurants on Yelp, what do we look at? Ratings and reviews. We are a society right now that values ratings and reviews. Are you ever going to buy from a vendor on Amazon that you've never heard of that's rated 3.5 stars? No. Are you going to buy anything under 4 stars out of 5, right? Some of us, we just go product search up, rated over that. Price low, rating high. That's how we buy, right? That's fine. But just remember that when people are making a decision like why start music and stay in music, they're asking each other. People will go on Facebook and say, hi, Facebook Hive Mind. I'm looking for recommendations for this, that, or the other. We trust other people's values more than we trust the source. So here's something to think about. When parents are wondering if their child should stay in music or start music, the conversation that they're having is happening with other parents long before it ever gets to you. We spend so much time as teachers thinking about recruitment and retention and advocacy, about how to have that conversation with parents about why stay in music, and how to have that conversation with kids about why staying in music. I will tell you, for every conversation that you get to have with a parent or child, there are at least 10 conversations happening that you will never be part of, because they're asking each other. They're looking for ratings and reviews themselves. It's happening on the football field. It's happening on the soccer field. It's happening in the carpool lane. It's happening at the other groups, the PTA meetings. Your child does music, right? They play clarinet. Yeah, my child's only bummed out. Is your child bummed out? Oh yeah, I know. And the fees, oh my gosh, every week it's an email. Think about how those conversations are happening. What are you doing to make those conversations valuable? Because if those parents were getting weekly updates of kids sharing the music they're making, and their kids are coming home and saying, Mom, guess what I did in music today? That conversation is very different. We have to prepare our stakeholders to advocate for our programs without us in the room, because the conversations are happening and we are not in the room where it happens. And we cannot advocate to be in the room where it happens all the time, but we can make sure the people who are in the room are armed and prepared with why music's valuable. And that's what we can do that's so valuable, right? That's what it comes down to. Think about our core art standards that we have now. Think about the idea of creating, performing, responding, connecting, and connecting music together. Look, advocacy, talking to legislators, this ability, this is a picture of me from a while ago. I like to speak with Senator Cassidy, who was on the HELP committee, right there, key decision maker on this well-rounded education, and, built a great relationship. We got the vote, really exciting. But this does not change students' life. This makes sure that federal policy and the formula for funding, right, that's passed down to states allows you and your district and your state to have access to those funds based on rules that allow music education to be part of it. But that does not mean that this law magically changes music education. It opens up the formula to provide access to funding. But it is not just about, I said music makes you smarter, so that's why we have jobs anymore. Those days are long gone. It's not about finding time to study and analyze the policy. It is every time you have a conversation with the stakeholder, you can advocate. So I ask you, advocate this weekend, advocate tomorrow, advocate the next day. When you talk to parents, tell them that music changes lives. Find your 15-second pitch, your 30-second. Find your elevator pitch for music and have it ready. Practice it. Prepare your parents, prepare your students, right? It's so valuable. I appreciate you watching this online session. I appreciate you taking the time. I hope that was at least informational to understand the history of all these laws and what the difference is, because too often I do think that we assume federal policy is everything, and it's not, right? And I hope I was able to give you some ideas of how we can be better advocates for music. Go on. Thank you so much for teaching music and changing the lives of students through music. Thank you.